My Lords, there's a lamentable tendency in the debates of the nation, and even in the discourses of your Lordship's House, to elide from food security to self-sufficiency. And we heard it a little bit just now. It was hinted at, indeed, by the Right Reverend Prelate in introducing the motion. He didn't exactly make the link, but he spoke about the decline in self-sufficiency since the 80s, and it was made explicit by some of my noble friends on this side. But it's fallacious. It's specious, and I think a moment's thought explains why, or reveals why. Food security depends on being able to source your supplies from the widest possible diversity of suppliers, so that you are not vulnerable to a localized shock or disruption which might as easily happen on your own territory as anywhere else. So when we come specifically to the broccoli and cauliflower being debated this afternoon, I think we have a pretty robust and diverse system in place. Yes, we grow a lot of these brassica in Lincolnshire. I think that's the most concentrated place, and some of it from my noble friend Lord Taylor, but all of it, I'm sure, excellent. We then buy from the EU, mainly Spain, a little bit from France, and then we buy from beyond, from Morocco, from Kenya, I think a little bit from Mexico. The difference is that when we move beyond the EU, at a time that we're complaining about these shortages, we are still incredibly applying tariffs. So we're saying that we don't have enough of the stuff and we don't have food security, and yet we have, if I understood the figures from the department correctly this morning, an 8% tariff for most of the year on brassica from, or at least on chilled and non-chilled and fresh cauliflower and headed broccoli from countries that either are not in the EU or we don't have a special trade deal with. Now, how on earth can that be sensible? I at least understand that we do produce some of our own brassica in this country. When we look at some of the other food tariffs, it becomes utterly unsustainable. I've gone on and on endlessly in your Lordship's chamber about the tariffs we continue to impose on Moroccan tomatoes, even though we barely produce any tomatoes. I know we produce some tomatoes. I used to be a member of the European Parliament. I had the Isle of Wight in my constituency. But even at the height of our very short tomato growing season, we are still importing about 80% of our tomatoes. Whom do we think we are protecting? And if we think it's silly when we get to the tomatoes, let's consider the real spike in prices which is happening this year in our supermarkets, which is of olive oil as a result of some of the same climatic changes that were being discussed earlier. We don't grow any olives in this country, to my knowledge. There's always some story in the Telegraph about someone in Cornwall having managed to grow tea or something, so maybe we do, right? So no offence if any Cornish olive growers or would-be olive growers are watching on television, but let me say that we are not a major producer of olives, and yet we are still imposing tariffs on olives and olive oil imported from Turkey or Tunisia or wherever it is, right? In other words, we've inherited these tariff schedules from the EU that were designed to protect growers particularly in Spain, but also Italy, Portugal and France. And we have still, 5 years almost to the day after Brexit, we have still not repealed them. Now, my lords, this country led the way as a free trader, especially in foodstuffs. And for the century that led up to the 1930s, it made us the richest place in the world. And the parties that were in the forefront of arguing for what was, in the phrase of the Labour Chancellor Philip Snowden, the free breakfast table, were the Lib Dems of the day, and particularly after their foundation in 1902, the Labour Party, because they understood that agricultural protectionism is a racket whereby the poor are forced to pay the rich. So now that we have these freedoms, now that we are once again in charge of our own trade policy, please may I ask the party opposite to look to its own heritage and to recover that global vision which once made us the wealthiest and most prosperous country on earth.